Greetings all, Dr. Raphael X here with another video with my friend Jeremy. Thanks for coming on, as always. And please subscribe to this channel, click on the like button, notifications button, comment, all that good stuff. So today we're going to be talking about aesthetics, the philosophy of beauty, kind of going down the same route. If beauty is something subjective, objective, if it's ideal according to idealism, or if it's real according to realism. This is an interesting topic. Basically, um, we tend to go towards a realist trend, of course, even though there are some idealist notions, because beauty, especially as portrayed in art, well, beauty, we'll see beauty is in itself. Yes, it is purely objective. But when you get to the art, the kind of the portrayal of beauty, we'll see that there's a lot of subjectivity put into that. Now, the thing is, if beauty is real, what is beauty? What makes up beauty? What are the characteristics of beauty? Now we can say basically from the order of the universe, right, that beauty kind of stems from um, from that essential aspect of the universe. So I just want to talk about basically aesthetics, which starts from actually Alexander Gottlieb Baumgarten. These German names I surely I butchered, but he's from the 18th century. He was the first one to use this word, and he understood it as a science of the senses. So really, beauty is going to impact us with this through the senses. This is a very realist Aristotelian position that um, since we're born with empty of ideas, that through the senses we're able to abstract beauty, but beauty as a metaphysical property, as a transcendental in things, that it actually exists in things, that beauty is not merely in the eye of the beholder. Right? This is a very it's an ancient science, even though the aesthetics as such um, is relatively modern. So we're going to talk about beauty. What is it? Does that even make sense? Because again, if it's totally subjective, it doesn't make sense to ask what a thing is, right? Because it would just be whatever we like. But is that whatever we like? Is that some rooted in objectivity in a thing? So we're going to talk about this a little bit and want to chime in here, Jeremy, but I think we're going to kind of stay within realism. But I don't know, maybe you'll surprise me. Position.
Yeah, beauty, good topic, and we could think about what good things there are to say about that. So, what might immediately occur when we hear the term beauty, at least in say philosophy, would be those three terms: the true, the good, and the beautiful. We can think about how those terms relate to each other. Traditionally, those terms have been considered by many to mean values that suffice unto themselves. Right? There's means and there's ends. For example, I fuel up my car, not because I like fueling up my car, not because I enjoy spending the money to fuel up my car, not because it's fun, but because I need to get somewhere. So it's a means. Right? And let's say I fuel up my car and it's a means to get to the beach. Is that an end in itself? Well, no, I want to get to the beach so I can have fun, so I can relax. Is fun an ultimate value? I mean, maybe not, right? So maybe for some other reason, I want to have fun because I conceive that to be my good in the moment, or I want to refresh for the week, whatever the case might be. But there is the notion that there are ultimate values, and some of those ultimate values have been named. Again, the true, the good, and the beautiful. Once we have arrived at truth, it's true, right? What else is there to say? Again, this some would have it. Once we've arrived at goodness, it's good, right? That's it. And likewise, once we have arrived at beauty, some would say the impersonal or perhaps impersonal, personal, we might get to that, but kind of without desire, without thinking, what am I going to get from this piece of beauty? Once we've arrived at beauty, it too has been construed as an ultimate value. So again, what might be the relations between some of these terms? Let's take, for example, truth and beauty. one idea could be that what we consider to be beautiful when we think about it is an adequate, competent visibility or phenomenal, meaning sensations, representation of some actuality, of some truth. So, for example, what is a beautiful, just starting with ourselves, what is a beautiful human body? Well, if in question is a human body such that is the pure product of a kind of a human hereditary information, right? Say geneticists could say, there's certain um, issues that can occur and certain mutations, and somebody can be born without an arm, without a finger, whatever the case might be. But let's say it's unimpeded human hereditary information such that has led to a Homo sapien body, and then that Homo sapien body is exposed to every relevant stimuli, right? For example, through the process of physical maturation and also exercise and sports and such, if it adapts ideally in principle, right? If it adapts ideally to those stimuli, to that actuality, then we say it's a beautiful human body. Right? Bodybuilders can get on stage and judges try to judge objectively which body is objectively more beautiful, more proportioned, symmetrical, developed, and so forth. Right? Conversely, if a human body is the product of a number of influences, for example, lots of bags of potato chips or lots of fast food, lots of being sedentary, this and that, the result being the result of not a single actuality, right, but a number of factors, we can say that result usually is not so beautiful. Another example could be architecture, right? What makes a building beautiful? Well, we think about what is the actuality that ought to be instantiated by the way of a building. Something, for example, like a law court, right? A Supreme Court. Would it be beautiful to house a Supreme Court in a shack? What do you think, Doc?
Oh, no.
No, right? But why? Why can't we put a Supreme Court in a little shoddy shack, right? And here we think, well, what is the actuality that is allegedly indicated by the Supreme Court? Well, law, right? Which human law then perhaps is kind of an attempt at in the social spheres in embodying or having something such as we find in nature, natural law, which is thought to be everlasting, stable, secure, absolute, and so forth. Right? So human law is kind of a maybe thought of as a dim imitation or a distant, should we say, imitation of that. And what is the right housing for truth that is everlasting, that is stable, that is secure? Is it a shack that can be blown away? No, right? So we look to nature. What in nature is like that? Well, mountains, right? Granite, rock faces, this and that, right? And those that might be the material that a skilled architect uses, like marble, granite, and looks to construct housing for a Supreme Court. Right? Just like a book, for example, and actually we used that example before, a really good book that conveys truth. It's strange if it's in a bad binding that costs a couple of cents, right? Because that indicates flimsiness, transiency, right? Versus the book, if it's truthful, it says true things. We want a form that is fit for that, right? You scribble some kind of great truth. Einstein comes up with E equals MC square, and he scribbles it in the sand. Oh, a wave comes. Sorry, right? So that's not a fit form for that truth. The apple hits Newton for the story, and he has eureka. The gravity, the this and the that, and he scribbles it in dust on his shelf. Then a gust of wind comes and takes it away. So it's not a fit form for great truths. For great truths, we understand, inscribe it in marble, right? Inscribe it in granite, that kind of stuff. Right?
Yeah.
Mount Rushmore, something like this. Great presidents, great faces. So briefly, I'll wrap up, but that could be an idea. It's a fit form for truth, right? Oh, so it's the Supreme Court, right? So we need something like that. What about housing, right? Each individual one's dignity, right? So we go and crowd people one on top of the other like sardines. That's not indicative of the appropriate actuality by the way of housing. That's why we look at, say, housing projects. We look at these cramped, confining kind of a housing situation. They're like, ah, that's ugly. That's not a fit form for this actuality. We look at a nice, dignified home, right? That is a fit form for an actuality. So that could be an idea, right? It's what is it that we are attempting to represent, and then we look to the phenomenal world and what means what, and we try to craft something that is beautiful. And it's not to say it's a precise formula. That's why there's something called artistic talent, right? That somebody just has a feel for that kind of stuff, an intuition for that kind of stuff. But these might be some guiding ideas or factors, possibly.
Yeah, no, the fact that you say there's principles to it show that it's not, there's reality to it. It's not purely something that we manipulate, that we arbitrarily dictate, we can say. So, really what you're saying is very anti-nihilistic. Today we live in a very nihilistic period, which doesn't believe in anything, right? The kind of human life is devoid of values, devoid of meaning, and this has to do with the crisis of beauty. It's a lot of people have come to Christianity, have come to Catholicism through the beauty of its art. Um, Now we could talk about later how beauty is recognized. It comes to well, we'll talk about the senses, how that works, but um, basically that this how this brings us to order. It could bring us directly to God, or maybe some will say indirectly through bringing us to the order through His creation. Because beauty, we sensibly grasp beauty, right? At least in a fundamental level. Later, we could talk about spiritual beauty, which, at least according to the moderate realists, we still kind of perceive first naturally. But then you can have a supernatural transfusion. We won't get into that. But so beauty, which is perceived, brings us, which is called contuition, actually. It brings us to God. Um, you just shouldn't have to convince someone that something's beautiful. I remember I had a teacher who said, if you have to convince me it's art, it's not art. He's kind of criticizing the contemporary, like art exhibits where you have a couple crumpled papers and has a tremendous interpretation. But the thing in itself is literally garbage many times. So you have to convince people it's art. Like, come on, this is art. Read the interpretation. Read what the author intended to do by it. One time I saw like 12 buckets filled with water at different levels, and it had a really profound interpretation, but the thing in itself is garbage. There's no work into it. I think you alluded to that too. There has to be some skill, something that catches the eye. So and this is the objectivity that's lost today, and this has brought about nihilism, right? Because essentially it's divorced from God. It's like art doesn't bring us anymore to God. We're just seeing what the author intended, this extreme subjectivity. So really, how we can prove that beauty exists is that word awesome, which we overuse it, and because we overuse it, we have lost the value of it. Awesome is a tremendous word, full of awe. So something should cause awe in us. So that's what beauty is, that when it's seen, when it's perceived somehow, then it gives us that aesthetic pleasure, it's called. This pleasure, not a sensible pleasure, but it's a spiritual pleasure. It's an elevated pleasure. Come through the senses, but it's something that's awesome, that causes this awe in us, that hasn't doesn't have to be, you don't have to convince us of it. So there's that immediacy there of beauty. Now, how is beauty known? And this is interesting. There are different faculties, like the faculties that we have to perceive beauty, obviously, is the first that we see. Right, we see, you mentioned painting, sculptures, architecture, but like a lot of these postmodern or postmodern, what have you, these artworks, they're based on nihilism and they don't cause awe at all. A lot of new buildings they're building in Washington, D.C. I think the new FBI building, it's ugly. It doesn't cause awe. It actually causes the opposite of aesthetic pleasure. It causes a disgust. So that's what ugliness does. It's like, ugh, right? It's automatic. Like you can't even, there's an immediacy there that you can explain. Architecture and people too. I mean, there's an objective beauty to people. Now later we get to what does that entail? What does that mean? Because it's harder to talk about what that consists of as opposed to talking that it exists is easy, but what is it? That's the harder question. So seeing and also hearing, obviously hearing like music, there's a beauty to music. And there's an immediacy in music. You can listen to a tremendous melody and without even knowing the piece of music when it's off. Like you're like, no, 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 you're like, oh, whoa, this this person, right? Either the note is off, the instrument malfunctioned somehow, but it's off and it is now become ugly. So we have seeing, hearing, and then also the imagination, right? Where we can represent beautiful images which come through the senses, right? According to the Aristotelian Thomists, that through the senses we're able to imagine and kind of compile different sense images to make I don't know, a beautiful golden pony is imagining something of the sort. And also um really kind of the intellect too. The intellect perceives beauty, and as you mentioned at the beginning, the different transcendentals, and they're very much related. So you can see that truth as beautiful, good as beautiful, all these things as because we don't have a faculty that's proper for beauty, like the intellect, truth, will, the good, but we don't have an intellect that perceives as beauty. So the beauty is kind of like the conjoined, we can say, different faculties we have. But the intellect really perceives, and the will too, that perceives really this highest form of beauty, which is uh yes, an abstract also, but at the same time is this spiritual is this spiritual beauty which underlies physical things, which again brings us to God, because God is the ultimate spiritual thing, we can say, the basis of all spiritual things. But go ahead, I'm taking a lot of time. I'm going to chime in here.
Yeah, a lot of interesting things to consider. One thing we could ask that's interesting is, as you mentioned, like, beauty is associated with content, or can aptly describe content in just about everybody's judgment, such that comes around in connection with working eyes, right? When we see, also with working ears, but not usually with touch or
Yeah,
taste or smell.
that's right.
That's interesting. Why? Right? If you want to
A
add
beautiful
something,
hamburger. Sorry to interrupt.
no, yeah. If you want
One says
to
that.
chime in, or I can keep going on
No,
that
no, I
one.
was just going to say that just to give an example to what you're saying.
Yeah, but that's
Don't
right,
say a
right?
beautiful hamburger. Yeah,
Say a beautiful hamburger. Well, from its visual aspects, like, oh, that's a beautifully put together hamburger. But to say, oh, that's a beautiful taste, that's a beautiful smell, it's a little
right,
strange.
right.
So we can really think about why that could be. We can say, what is it about sight and what is it about hearing, such that that content can be called beautiful, but not that of, again, the other senses that we mentioned. One idea that could be explored would be that by the way of touch and smell and taste, ideas of sufficient scope cannot be represented. Meaning, let's take sight. Let's say that we hire the best painter to paint a sign that says no walking on the grass for somebody's yard. How
Hmm.
beautiful can that sign be? Can it be very beautiful?
Yeah,
It's
it
like
could be,
it,
but
it
not
could,
really.
once we
Right.
know that. Yeah, once we know, I mean, you could say anything. I get Michelangelo to paint whatever, walking on the grass. But once we know this is a commercial painting, or this is just like a little drawing for somebody not to cross the grass, it's like the beauty of that is limited, right? No smoking in the hotel room. How beautiful can that be? Also, just one sound, right? Let's say we take the most beautiful symphony, but we take a small enough segment of it to where, whatever that would be, 1 second, half a second, where there's just that one little segment. Does it make sense then to call that beautiful?
Right. Yeah.
Right. So we could say maybe that it's not anything absolutely and intrinsically about the aforementioned senses that makes it impossible for beauty to be associated with them. And in some way, right? For example, perfumes, I think the makers of perfumes do attempt to kind of allude to some kind of aesthetic or at least enjoyable experience. It's like, oh, that's, I don't know if I would call it beautiful perfume, but it's something, right? Taste also sometimes somebody may say, this is such an unbelievably delicate wine. It's like a beautiful taste, right? So something possibly there. Touch also, right? If you give your loved one a hug, that is it beautiful in the sense that a painting is beautiful, but at the same time, it could in every way be more meaningful and better than looking at the best paintings at the best museums and this and that. So there's something there, but it's just that perhaps we cannot represent an idea of a sufficient enough scope by the way of these this range of content, right? It's likewise, let's say, with a sentence. A sentence can be beautiful, right? Obviously, from great literature, even just one sentence, it can be it can be awesome, right? It can convey a great idea and it can be put together well, and the words can align together. Half a sentence, well, on the way to beauty, maybe. What about a word? That's already tough. Maybe for somebody, some good word like love or justice, to me, that sounds beautiful. But already that's just kind of that's very subjective. It's just I have associations with. Hey, what about now a letter? Can a letter be beautiful? We get the idea. So maybe it's just a theory. I'm just speculating, but perhaps it's that. Perhaps by the way of smell and taste and touch, we can only attain to the visibility of or aim to represent ideas of a very small scope, and especially ones that are concerned with the body, organic immediacy. For example, I ate, I burped, and that means that my stomach is full. That's a very small idea. It's an appropriate sign for that idea, but it's a very small idea, right? Smells, generally in nature, right? They mean, oh, here's this one flower, or here's a rotting carcass, or here's this or that, right? So they're kind of small time, arguably, and touch too. It's like, all right, here's a stone, here's a tree, something like this. But with sight, and apparently even with sound, we apparently can represent these vast ideas, right? For example, with sound, take some or another actuality, excuse me, such as time, right? Succession, one thing after another. And certainly songs have been composed such that when you listen to them, you're like, wow, that does kind of represent time. It's a beautiful song, right? A painting can go and represent some great theme, war, right? Something like this. So maybe those are means, maybe one of the necessary but insufficient conditions for beauty is that something of sufficient scope is represented, right? And perhaps primarily sight and sound are the avenues that permit such representation. But again, that's just speculation. But go ahead.
No, no, for sure. Just to build what you're saying with sight and sound, like the good, with the transcendental good, the beauty is essentially the same as good, and reality is the same, but we can distinguish it logically. Actually, beauty is similar to the good than to the truth, because it's the good, but it's not a good that is useful. And that's what the sight and the hearing can understand, because it's like an animal has an appetite for what's good for him. But the animal can never appreciate art, because art, which should be beautiful and produce that beautiful pleasure in us, the aesthetic pleasure in us, it should it's a contemplative good. So it's a good for its own sake. As you mentioned before, means and ends. It should be an end of itself. It's not a means to another good. And really the only faculty, and these are the higher faculties that we have, the higher senses that perceive more, um, we could say, untangible, immaterial realities, hearing and seeing. So that's why, so it is true that beauty adds something to the good. That first we apprehend the good through the intellect, and then we desire the good. The intellectual appetite, which is the will, desires the good. But the beauty there adds something to that. and it adds a type of, we can say, a profound feeling. So it's not feelings in a sense that, very subjective, very not, unjustifiable, we can say, even though feelings can be justifiable, but not a type of arbitrary feeling, a feeling that just spurs in us that doesn't make any sense, or a feeling that should be suppressed, but a feeling that's good, a good, profound pleasure in us, which is a spiritual pleasure actually. And this is good. We should feel this. If you do not feel this aesthetic pleasure, there's something wrong with the perceiver. There's something wrong with you. So that's something to keep in mind. Sorry, do you want to say something?
No, I was just saying something wrong with the perceiver, but I was go
There's
ahead,
something
ask.
wrong with the perceiver. So there's different types of there's different types of beauty for sure. So there's beauty, and we'll get kind of maybe to a definition, or at least the characteristics of beauty. Because beauty, I think, is hard to define because it's a very fundamental reality. As we said, it's a transcendental, it's a property, it's a good of the thing. The same thing as a good, but it adds this notion of aesthetic pleasure. It gives us, the best is to, because it's so fundamental, we define it by its effects, what it produces. But we should be able to see beauty in different realms. We can say in the material realm, the highest form of beauty, the spiritual realm, right? With the intellectual and the moral, right? Intellectual realm, um, which is, yeah, like a knowledge. There's beauty there in knowing something that's beautiful in the intellectual realm. It's hard to equate it with truth, but truth is beauty. But with moral, with the good that someone does, that moral beauty, that is easily to see. We can say moral beauty. We can talk about beauty, natural beauty and artificial beauty. How artificial beauty, in a sense, has to reflect, and is the problem with art today, especially postmodern art, is anti-beauty actually, and it's explicitly anti-beauty. Like, it seeks to be ugly. You see, I saw this in a contemporary art exhibit, a urinal, which was actually with graffiti on it, and it was dirty. So it's supposed to, it's trying to produce that opposite, as we mentioned, the opposite of aesthetic pleasure. So, but artificial beauty, which is art, should somehow be related to the natural beauty, which is from God, artificial from man, natural from God. And there's also an ideal aspect of beauty too. Um, that beauty, yes, it is rooted in reality, but there's also something that we put in. Also, there's something that we put in, we're able to extract it. So, based on the metaphysical beauty, there's a type of logical beauty which which comes from man also, and man is able to create that from reality, and in a sense is like co-creating with God, being an artist, right? And that's what some people feel, that as their vocation, which is tremendous. But go ahead, sorry, I'm taking a lot of time here.
No, good points. Yeah. Yeah, that's interesting to think about the distinctions between natural and artificial beauty. The question, again, it could be asked, why is it that something is beautiful? Like, how do I know what form is an appropriate form for a given actuality? Right? Why isn't a flimsy 2 cent book edition an appropriate form for a very truthful text? Why isn't a shack an appropriate form for a Supreme Court? Right. So I think we kind of touched upon that. But I think we can ask the question, what actuality does, in fact, in reality, lead to what? Right. Again, if you allow a body to adapt to stimuli and it's able to do so, what will it look like? And that's kind of the answer to the question of what's a beautiful human body, possibly, right? As for sounds, it's probably naive to say that composers copy nature per se. And yet, let's say I want to compose a lullaby, and I take what is it, the tone, whatever the terms there are, of a dying animal, the shrieks of a dying animal as being eaten, right? And that's how I make my lullaby. Is it going to be a fit form for this actuality that I'm attempting to embody, which is go to sleep, right? Calm, peace? No. So it's not that I'm copying nature like copy and paste. Let me take
Right.
the birds and creating a symphony out of those chirps. But we're looking kind of to what is the case when somebody's excited. How does their voice change? When somebody's calm, how does their voice change? When they're affectionate, how is their voice? When something violent is occurring, maybe like a lightning storm, what does that sound like? Right? When what in nature is kind of is reminiscent of time or the passage of time, perhaps it's the waves, who knows, right? But I think that ultimately we do look to reality as it is given to us to see what phenomenal content, right? What form, what visibility is the outcome of what actuality. And then when we attempt to generate beauty, so to say, artificially, meaning by the way of our own efforts, I think that's something to look to. Again, the reason why a flimsy book is a bad form for a truthful book or book binding is because something that's flimsy is flimsy. It's very transient. It goes away. It's very easy to fall apart. Truth is everlasting. Truth is solid. Truth is stable. So if you want something more like truth, take something that seems, at least to us, more like truth, right? Relative to any given person. Uh, uh, you know, granite or marble might as well be everlasting. It's just going to be there, generation upon generation. Take something like that, some kind of something solid, right? So, font that perhaps is reminiscent of those kinds of things. So, excuse me. I think that a competent artist probably is looking for an appropriate form for the actuality that he or she is attempting to embody. I think purity of intent also is essential. So, for example, many people would say that there's a watch. Oh, that's a beautiful watch, and then you find out that it's what's the word? It's a fake watch, or
Mhm.
what's the word for it? Do you know?
Counterfeit?
Counterfeit watch, yeah, something like that. Meaning it's cheap material. It's
Like
not really
a
gold.
Folex? To get those Rolexes in Chinatown? I'm sorry.
Yeah, exactly. Right. You find out it's not really that. It's not really gold. It's really painted plastic. Like it's really hard to conceive it as beautiful, right? Because there's it's an impure product of multiple desires to cut costs, to make a profit. If, for example, again, you task an architect with one task, create a structure that is the ideal form for a home, right? A home involves different ideas, such as, again, human dignity, security, peace, so forth. A skilled architect who has that aesthetic sensibility should be able to use the right materials in the right way, put them in the right place, and create something like, wow, that's a beautiful home, right? But now, if that architect is told, you know what, we need you to go underneath this budget, and we need you to buy supplies from this company because of these union regulations, and we need you to, do this and do that. Now the product is that much less likely to be beautiful, right? Because it's a whole bunch of motives that are feeding into it, and that's where, again, as we mentioned, you see the big housing projects and this and that. We're like, oh, those are ugly, right? Because, for example, it doesn't respect the fact that each person is his or her own world and needs their own space and so forth, right?
Mhm.
If you told Michelangelo as he's painting the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel, if you told him on the one hand, simply look to the best of your ability, visibly portray great truths, uh, the world, the fall of man, this and that. That's one thing, and that's probably what we see. But if he was told and he listened, we want a minimum of 1 million visitors a year. So let's take a poll of what they like, and this is what you need to draw. And we also need to suck up to this, and that current little political situation. So you need to add those elements and this and that. Being Michelangelo, it would probably do still something good, but it probably wouldn't be like the Sistine Chapel, right? You take if the idea is base and vulgar, a grand visibility for it is itself ugly. So, for example, let's say that it's an advertisement, right? Buy soap, and somebody comes up with this extremely elaborate, intricate sentence pushing you to buy soap. Thou shalt uh, uh, situate yourself in a sanitational situation, whatever the case might be, right? It's not that it then becomes beautiful. It's like a parody. It's like that, like those are
Yeah.
parodies, right? Thou
Yeah.
shalt not, not close the lid in the restaurant, whatever. It's a parody because
Yeah.
the idea is too slight. It has to be a big idea. It has to be a pure motive, right? And I think those are some of the building blocks of beauty. If
No,
you
it's
ask somebody that has that ability for that aesthetic sensibility, and you tell them, think about simply how do you make this look good, right? How do you build a beautiful home? How do you make a beautiful book binding? How do you portray great ideas, like again on the Sistine Chapel? How do you portray ideas such as truth and justice in building a Supreme Court, for example? They should be able to come up with something good, right? We see this stuff from ancient times, the Parthenon, different cathedrals, all that. It's like, wow, right? Probably purity of intent, broadness of the scope of the actuality that the portrayal of which was attempted. Uh, Probably something along those lines, right?
yeah, no, it's the motivator is definitely key. And it's easier to be a philosopher. It's easier to be an artist than a philosopher because explaining this is harder than actually do it. So you're right in a sense, doing it. An artist knows what beauty consists of, and they're doing it for the contemplation. Really, they're not doing it as Michelangelo, for a useful good, right? It's for the contemplative good. So, and that's why religion is the main motivator of art, especially Catholicism. The Protestantism, they don't believe in art. Islam Islam has some nice figure, not like pattern type of art, but there's no figures. So really, it's only Catholicism. Judaism's nothing. So in Catholicism, you have this driving force that has produced the most beautiful artwork. So even by secular, um, professionals, they themselves would say in their top 10, you'll definitely have sculptures from Michelangelo or Donatello there for sure. The driving force in the Renaissance is huge here with this whole humanist movement, which was a Christian humanism that that portrayed the sensibles. And that's why I see a lot of muscular men, Michelangelo doing right, muscular men, and things like that. This humanism, but still religious as the driving force. So really, without religion, without that fundamental transcendental mentality, that push, there's no way you're going to, first of all, you're not going to persevere and you're not going to be able to actually portray beauty. So, and you alluded to, I mean, one of the things you're criticizing is the modern notion of art, or at least how modern philosophers see art, which is the aesthetic pleasure is beauty. So they don't say that it's purely subjective. Really, there's no difference between the pleasure you feel and the beauty that causes it, which is totally absurd. So it's like you yourself are causing that pleasure to occur, which is totally absurd. So the question is, if it is objective, if it is in reality, what are its characteristics? So many do agree, because there are many realist philosophers, that beauty is real, that beauty is objective, right? And that it is the root cause of, through the senses, of the aesthetic pleasure that is caused in us. So Thomas Aquinas is going to talk about, and St. Augustine's very similar on this, three conditions that something is, and it has to do with the purpose of things, right? It has to do with what things were made for, which you alluded to also. So basically, he's going to say things have to be integral. So if you're going to do a head, for example, a head, a half a head is not beautiful because it's lacking integrity. So integrity has to be uh, an essential element for objective beauty. It has to be integral. So if you have a face without a nose, it's ugly, right? And this is objective. So that's the first one, integrity. The second one is going to be proportionality. Proportionality is also, there has to be a certain proportion within, let's take the same example of a face. If you have one eye that's bigger than the other eye, it's ugly. This is objectively ugly. This is not. Like, oh, you say it's ugly, I say it's beautiful. No, no, this is ugliness objectively. A huge nose with a small face, ugly, right? Because of the proportion, there's lack of proportionality. And this could be applied, this is universal application, buildings and everything. A tiny door, huge windows, right? Doesn't make sense. And also the splendor of the thing. So Thomas Aquinas would say, if something's kind of messy or it's not colorful, like usually, so he's going to say basically colorfulness, if you will, is more beautiful than black and white. So it has to be something more a splendor. It has to be bright. It has to be clear. It has to be neat, right? Neat. It can't be messy. So this is not dogmatic, of course. You know, some people think St. Thomas is his teaching is dogmatic, but no. But this is probably the best explanation of what consists objective beauty, right? So this pertains more to the senses. All right, and I'm going to finish here, and then I'll give you the last word. Uh, this pertains to senses, and this is important to know because now we're trying to abstract to universalize to be able to apply to particulars. But beauty, we have to be able to perceive beauty, and to be able to perceive beauty, like St. Thomas did, we have to live in moral beauty. Like we have to practice virtue. So we have to be virtuous to perceive physical beauty. That's crazy. I know that's kind of it sounds crazy, but it really isn't because beauty is it's a blanket term. It's universally applied, even though it's analogically applied in different senses, but it's the same. So let us practice virtue so that there won't be anything wrong with the perceiver, namely us, that we will be able to perceive beauty. And that would make our lives so much more beautiful, right? Our lives are not beautiful because we cannot perceive beauty, because there's something wrong in us, because we're not able to open ourselves up to the objective beauty that exists with these three characteristics. And that's all I got to say on that. But I'll give you the last word, Jeremy.
Yeah, that's a great way to end it, and great point, right? That we can try to elaborate just a little bit more. That the eyes that do the saying, they need to be right, right? If in just the obvious physical analogies, if I'm colorblind, I'm not going to see colors. There's nothing wrong with colors. It's just that I can't see them, right? I need to be able to see something. I
Right.
need to be able to see, and here it's not my fault, obviously, just to say, I need to be able to see beauty. And why might that be that the virtue of the perceiver has anything to do with the perception of physical beauty? Well, if anything that we said is at all on point, right, then beauty,
Hopefully it is.
yeah,
But go ahead.
right. But if then beauty, broadly speaking, again, it can be thought of as a fit, appropriate, a adequate form for some particular actuality that does really lead to that form, or in nature or artificially, that we approximate kind of the themes and the elements that we're given in nature. And if there's a mismatch between appearance and actuality, then beauty is the wrong assessment. And yet, because of our personal predilections, our skewed conception and desires, we can still perceive the object as beautiful, which isn't always bad. So, for example, let's say that in question is a very old, hunchbacky lady, right? Is she beautiful or not? Well, if she's my grandma and I perceive her as my grandma, to me, she can be beautiful, right? Hopefully not, in every way, but she's beautiful, right? She's my grandma. But to somebody else whose grandma it is not, she might not be beautiful, right? So it's not always bad, but sometimes it is. And so, for example, is a mummy beautiful or not? Like in a pyramid. Well, if I'm an Egyptologist and I study mummies, and my objective, my actuality that I have in mind are mummies, and is to get the bigger grant because I found the best mummy and the best preserved mummy and so forth. I find a well preserved mummy. I'm like, oh my goodness, this is the most beautiful thing I've ever seen. And I'm not necessarily mistaken there because the form is appropriate to the actuality. The actuality is a mummy, right? Is a preserved body, and the form that I see is indicative of that, right? For better quality or worse quality. But now, if in question, if the form is a living human being, and what I have at hand is a mummy, then that mummy is not beautiful. Return of the Mummies, or some of these horror movies from the pyramids or whatever, where the mummies run out, right? Why? Because they're supposed to. It's like some kind of strange, terrifying combination, right? All those zombie movies where it looks like a person, it looks like a living person, but really it's a zombie. It's a brainless kind of a vampire or whatever the case might be. So then there's a mismatch between the idea allegedly or actuality allegedly indicated, such as a living person, in what you see, a mummy. What the heck is this? A vampire or what is it? A zombie. So then it's not beautiful. And yet, if there's something wrong with me, I have some kind of strange apperceptive scheme, I may possibly perceive that a mummy still to be beautiful, even if the idea that it's supposed to indicate is a living person, right? We hear of horror stories, maybe of some very strange people keeping very strange things or keeping, fortunately, bodies of their relatives, who knows what, right? So there's a mismatch in their head. This is the wrong form for what you're after, right? And say in a museum of natural history, there's shrunken skulls or heads of when people do that to their enemies. It's beautiful vis-a-vis, say, an interest in those kinds of studies, right? But it's not beautiful vis-a-vis the objective of a healthy human head. So if I perceive personally, if I think that a healthy living human head, if the form for it is a shrunken, shriveled head from the museum, you get what I'm saying? There's
Mhm.
something wrong with my perceptive capacities, right? That's why we say that if I don't know if should give that example, but if a person looks to engage in relations such that would be perfectly appropriate within a very vast age range with somebody that is 120 years old and finds that person romantically beautiful, we say there's something wrong with them, right?
Uh-huh.
Say something wrong with you because that is the wrong form for the actuality that is here in question, just like with the mummies and so forth. We get the idea. So there's quite a range
Right.
of visibility to idea. I can find many things beautiful, but it's not an infinite range. And ultimately, there has to be some kind of, it seems, alignment between actuality or idea and its visibility. And if it's completely mismatched, then there's probably a mishmash in my head. Hopefully, my head is not shrunken. And it might be, so to speak. So
That's why the perceiver is so important. I mean,
that could be
somebody,
why, right? And
yeah,
if I kind of uh, lead a good life and I lead a virtuous life, and then hopefully I'll see beauty there where it belongs, and I won't see beauty there where it doesn't belong, or at least I will then switch up my ideas appropriately. If I see a mummy, I'm going to think this could be beautiful relative to the study of relative to Egyptology. This is not beautiful relative to a healthy human body, right? Even what I want to do with my body. If I think that it's beautiful for me to go and do these insane things with my face and try to chop off my nose and make myself look like a fish or who knows something, right? That's something off with me, with my
right.
perceptive scheme, because there's just too much of a misalignment here, right? I can try to make myself look beautiful, my hair like this, like that, like this, a lot of things, makeup like this, like that, a whole variety. But if I go past a certain line, right? And again, I think I'll be beautiful by, I don't know, making a broomstick grow out of my forehead just to try to make something up that hopefully isn't real, although it could be for all we know. Then I've crossed the line. It's no longer beautiful, and then it shows that there's something off with me and my judgment.
That's right. And it's an
So
attack on order. is attack on order and really attack on God deep down, because this is what order is based upon, the orderer, and really just to rearrange things. And we're seeing this with certain types of surgeries out there, which I won't mention what kind, but you can imagine certain types of surgery that are mutilations. I'm not talking about actual enhancement surgeries, like to fix something, but to destroy, to literally destroy. It's a war against order. So definitely the restoration of beauty, the recognition of natural beauty as objective, artificial beauty and art give us this aesthetic pleasure, but based on nature, artificial, and then the spiritual, the moral, which we talked about also as the culmination. All right, well, we'll leave it at that. Until next time, maybe we'll pick up this subject again. Thank you, Jeremy, for joining me. And until next time, God bless you all. All right.